Good morning, everyone. What a beautiful day. Man. This sermon is by request, and I think we need to do a lot of thinking about this particular subject because it happens to everybody. You know, death is something that we don't like to talk about. We don't really even use the words for death. I'm amazed at how often people ask me a question about Anna's dying. When did your wife pass? And my answer, I don't know whether I'm just getting calloused or something, but my answer is my wife died in January. Because I think that we soften this too much. We don't actually stare death in the face. We don't have I say we, you may, but I think the world in general does not like to even consider death. That's why Solomon wrote in Ecclesiastes that it's better to go to a house of mourning than to a house of feasting. And you think, why in the world would anybody rather go to a funeral than to a party? And normally you wouldn't. But there's a great lesson that needs to be learned, and that is that death is a vicious enemy. And death will take every last one of us unless the Lord comes again. But in reality, death has already taken us. And I want you to turn to a passage found in Ephesians chapter 2, where the Apostle Paul is writing to people who are Christians. There's no doubt about their having been saved, because it goes on in this chapter to talk about their salvation. But when he writes to them and when he begins explaining this, he says in chapter 2 and verse 1, "And you, whoever reads this letter, you were dead in your trespasses and sins." Wow. Now, understanding it, he's writing to people who are still alive. But death has already taken these people. He says, "You were dead in your trespasses and sins, in which you formerly walked." So this is something that is a way of life. "In which you formerly walked according to the course of this world." The world will lead you to death. Now, we understand that there's more than one kind of death, and we're going to have to talk about that, but here it's obvious that he's referring to the spiritual kind of death. He says, "In which you formerly walked according to the course of this world, according to the prince of the power of the air." Boy, that's a confusing one. "Of the spirit that is now working in the sons of disobedience." Boy, putting all that together is a brain teaser. The prince of the power of the air, the spirit that is now working in the sons of disobedience, is the same thing as the course of this world. But what does he mean by that? He says in verse 3, "Among them we too." I guess he's talking about himself and the other apostles, or I don't know. "Among them we too all," every last one of us, "formerly lived in the lusts of our flesh, indulging in the desires of the flesh and of the mind, and were by nature children of wrath, even as the rest." Oh, but there's a but. Boy, this is an important but. "But God, being rich in mercy, because of his great love with which he loved us, even when we were dead in our transgressions, made us alive together with Christ. By grace you have been saved." Ooh, it's important that we understand that even though death captures every one of us, there is a rescue from death that's important to know. Parting. I still am not used to living without my girl. There are times that I just sit in my chair and I can't help myself. I used to teach my boys not to cry. Not to cry. Wipe those tears away, boys. Be a man. And then I had to teach one of my boys the difference in when you cry and when you don't. I can remember that lesson so well sitting at a table at McDonald's, teaching him the difference between pain, physical pain, and emotional pain. Teaching him that you cry when your mama dies. You don't cry when you smash your finger. There's a difference. I don't know about the wisdom in all of that. But I do know that you do cry when your mama dies. That's a good reason to shed tears. Because of the separation. Because you're parting. And there's a possibility you may never be reunited. A possibility. Shakespeare wrote in Romeo and Juliet, parting is such sweet sorrow. I beg your pardon, dear Will. There's nothing sweet about that sorrow. There's nothing wonderful about not having my girl again until. There's nothing sweet about that. There is something sweet about God's plan, though. The same plan where David said once his child had died because of his sinfulness with Bathsheba, he says, I cannot go. I cannot receive my son back to me here, but I can go to him. I think David believed that, and I believe that is a truth. That David had the capability, had the possibility of going to be with his son again. But there are conditions. There are conditions. There are reasons that we can go, and there are reasons that we can't. What I am amazed about this world and what I've been thinking an awful lot about, because when you start losing people that you really love, that you really care about, that you really want to be with, and you're separated from them, it makes you think about why you still want to be here. It makes you ponder those things. It makes you wonder about your success in going to them. That's why Solomon wrote that it's better to go to a house of mourning than to a house of feasting, because you don't ever think about that when you're at a party. When was the last time you thought about dying and making your life right before God when you were at a picnic or a feast or any kind of a party? You don't do that. You're really, really unusual. Yeah. Let's say you're special if you do that. Generally, we think of everything in the world but what we need to do to get right with God when we're in a house of feasting. I think as we ponder these things, as we think about them, we think about what life is all about in the first place, and I've spent a lot of time recently thinking about why I'm here. What is it that the Lord wants from me here and now? And I think about that same man, David, because David had something really special about him. It says that David was a man after God's own heart. We've talked about that a number of times, but I want to mention it again. We've got some that haven't heard this, and I think it's really important to understand what that meant. That David was a man after God's own heart. Does that mean that David was like God? Does it mean that he was similar to God in some way? That he was fashioned after God's heart? Oh, I can think of a bunch of things about David and what he did that don't fit that. I think about him, first of all, having an affair with another man's wife, adultery with another man's wife, having a child by that woman, and then trying to hide it by sending Uriah home to be with her so he might be confused that it's his child. But Uriah was such a faithful servant. He says, Lord, I can't go in to my wife while my men are out there in the field and they're risking their lives. I can't do that. I'm too faithful to my men, to you. Boy, that must have stuck like a knife in David's heart. So he sends him back to the front and he tells his general, put him out there where he's going to die. And David lost some of his own faithful men putting him out there. Man, how many sins did David commit there? Is that after God's heart? Is that what we think? No. I'll tell you what that does mean. David, overall, all of his life, when he wasn't stumbling like that, was seeking God's heart. He wanted God's heart. He wanted a smile from the Almighty. He wanted a good word from his God. He wanted God to say, well done, good and faithful servant, come on in. That's what David wanted, what he was after. David recognized, I knew this was going to be a box of Kleenex. Some things you just don't talk about without sniffling. So pardon me, folks. When I think about David, I think about the number of times that David sinned. But you know what David said? David made a statement. Against thee and thee only I have sinned and done what is evil in your sight. To me, that means that there's only one thing that separates us from God, and that is disobeying God. Anything that we do to each other, anything that we do that's of an evil nature, the only thing that makes that wrong and makes that deadly is that God had prescribed something different for us and we ignored him. And I think this is where we come down to why it is so important for us to understand about death. You ever talk to somebody about being saved? And they look at you like, huh? Like, from what? They're living life and they're living it large and everything is going like they want it to go in life. It's like that party and a funeral thing. As long as things are going wonderfully for us, we don't even consider the end of this life. We're still planning for more. So once in a while, it's good for us to have to think about the end of this life. But that's not even the death that matters. Not even the death that matters. Because when you go back to Genesis chapter 1, and you see the creation of man, and then chapter 2 where God gives them the garden, and then chapter 3 where he has given them a rule. That is, you can have anything you want out here, but there's one thing I want to warn you against. I do not want you eating from that tree of the knowledge of the good and evil. The day that you eat of that, you will surely die. Do you suppose they understood that? Do you suppose they had any inkling of the end result of what she was about to do there? She did what God said don't do. And because of that, there was law that came into play. Law. It's kind of like what happened when in Genesis chapter 1 and verse 3, the Creator said, "Let there be light." And there was light. You ever pondered what that means? Let there be light. Was that this? Was that the sun, the moon, and the stars? Well, we know it wasn't, because that didn't happen until day 4. So what was it that God created when He said, "Let there be light"? I would challenge you. I would challenge you to read through the Bible and find the number of places that light is used in the Scriptures, Old and New Testament. Find out what that word means in every place where you read it. I guarantee you're going to find many, many, many more times that light means wisdom, knowledge, understanding, than it does the frequencies that produce illumination. Now, why is it that the Lord uses words like that that have more than one meaning? Like, why did He say to Eve, "The day that you eat of it, you shall surely die"? Let me ask you a question. Did she die that day?
No.
That was quick. Huh? What do you mean spiritually? There's more than one way you die? You know, when Shakespeare wrote, "For Juliet to say, 'Parting is such sweet sorrow,'" what was about to happen? If I remember the story right. Boy and girl, smoochy smoochy, we're not going to get smoochy smoochy anymore. There was not going to be any kissing, hugging, any of that kind of stuff, because parents were getting in the way. They were going to be torn apart, separated forever. That's not sweet. That hurts to the bone. That's something you don't ever want. You don't want to be separated from the people that give you comfort, that make you smile, that make you feel good all over. You don't want that separation. So when families become dead to one another, it's never a good thing. Never a good thing. That separation is what happened when they did what God told them not to do. They broke a rule, and there was a penalty for breaking that rule. Let me explain that a little bit. The penalty for breaking a rule. When I was about somewhere 10 to 12, I did a lot of stuff that I shouldn't have done. I just have to admit, I was not a real good boy. Matter of fact, my grandmother kind of followed me around the neighborhood from time to time, and she knew. I never could figure out how she knew what I had done. But she called me into the store one day and she said, "Darryl, son, I want you to quit playing on the neighbor's garage roof." "Grandma, how do you know?" "Just, I know. Don't play on their roof." You know, I really loved my grandmother, but I thought she was dumb. She was not dumb, I can tell you. This woman had ears and eyes. I don't know how at her age she could see and hear like she did, but I've told you about trying to sneak into her store to get a Coke, and she had this swinging door, two swinging doors, two screen doors that were always open so that the wind could come through because it's hot in Florida. And she had this cowbell up there, and I had that cowbell down to a science. I could slide through that door and not make a sound. And by the time I got all of my person in there, I'd hear, "Darryl!" How do you do that? She knew. She said, "Don't play on that roof anymore. You're going to get hurt." "Grandma, you don't know what you're talking about." So I snuck over there and I was playing. Now the attraction to the roof was a tree next to the roof. I could get up on the roof by another tree, and then I could go over and get into this tree from the roof, but I couldn't get to that tree from the ground. I mean, it's all logical to me. It fit. So I went over, I climbed up that tree, I got on the roof, I went over to the other tree and I got up in it, and a limb broke. And Darryl, like Humpty Dumpty, went down. There was a wood pile underneath that tree, beside the garage where I wasn't supposed to be. And I fell on my hands and knees on this wood pile, which was 2x4s with nails in them. And one of those nails went all the way through my kneecap. And I couldn't get it off. So I go dragging this 2x4 back to Grandma. The first thing out of her mouth was, "You've been on that roof, haven't you?" How do you do that? Well, let me tell you, the rest of the story is not real pleasant. Because Grandma had a way of treating things where you understood the consequences of your sins. She yanked that 2x4 off of there, and of course all the rust on the nail was now covered with blood, and it went not just through the kneecap but into the knee joint. I limped for a while over that one. Anybody feel that? Can you feel that? But that's not the worst part. Then Grandma goes and gets a bottle of iodine. Anybody know what iodine is all about? I'm not saying mercurochrome now. I'm saying iodine. The difference is iodine stings like you can't believe. She took an eyedropper and she filled that thing with iodine and she stuck it in that nail hole and squirted. And I danced for about 6 weeks. I don't think, that still hurts. I can't remember which leg it was, but man, did that hurt. Now, was that Grandma's fault? How in the world would that ever be Grandma's fault? You know, people do things contrary to God's laws. Now, there was a law there. Now, not just the fact that she said don't go on the garage. The law was you're going to get hurt. That's the reason for her giving me that law. Every law that God gave to his people was so they would not get hurt. But we know better. We know better. Grandma's just dumb. No, Grandma's not dumb. I think about the number of things that I've done. I can't lay any of my misery on my parents or God. Because I had a choice, and I knew. Here's the thing. Grandma knew that there was danger around that garage. She knew that there was danger in the tree, that limbs break. She was a long time in this world before she told me those things. So she had seen, there's a commercial on TV about, I think it's Farmers Insurance. We know a thing or two because we've seen a thing or two. Well, yeah, Grandma had seen a thing or two. She knew, she understood. So she tried her best to warn me. My whole life was filled with big signs. Don't enter. Tape, crime scene tape across the door. Oh boy, I had a favorite restaurant over in Bellevue. It was an Indian restaurant, Hindu kind of food, curry stuff. Oh, was that good. My friend and I would go there every day and we'd get lunch. It was cheap, really cheap for Bellevue, Washington. Nothing's cheap in Bellevue, but that was. That should have been one of those things, But man, did it taste good. And we ate there and we ate there and we ate there. And then we went one day and, what's going on? There's this crime scene tape around the doors. Wouldn't let anybody in. Now, I suppose we could have lifted the tape and gone on in. That's what I've done other ways, I've seen the tape, I've seen the sign, and I go right past it anyway. That's not light, folks. That's not illumination right there. That's not enlightenment. That's ignoring the rules right there. It's ignoring the signs. It's ignoring the warnings and going ahead and doing it anyway. Come to find out that the restaurant that we love so much was in the newspaper because the dogs and cats had been disappearing in the neighborhoods. And we were eating them on Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday. And they were good. I can't argue with the fact that it tasted good, but oh man. We need to not ignore the signs. Not ignore the crime scene tape because there's a penalty for breaking the law. Gravity just laughs when you fall off of that roof and land on a 2x4 with. Gravity doesn't care. The laws don't care. We will suffer the penalty of our violating laws. And the worst penalty is this parting. Parting is such sweet sorrow. When we demonstrate our lack of trust in God, when we demonstrate our rebellion to God's laws or rules that are only there to protect us, when we do that, we are parted from Him. That's the death that really means something. Now, I'm sure, I am positive that I can be reunited with my girl. It's not going to be my wife, but she'll still be my friend. I am positive that I can see other loved ones that have gone on before me, that have died, not passed away, died before me. I'm convinced of that, but there is a solution that needs to be met. I'm running out of time real quick here. I want you to go back to that statement made in 1 Corinthians. In 1 Corinthians chapter 15. There's a statement made there that I want us to examine just a bit here. In verse 25, it's talking about how long our Savior's going to reign. It says, "For he must reign until he has put all his enemies under his feet." Enemies. You know who that is? Do you know who are our Lord's enemies? Well, it's going to tell you who one of them is here. It says, "For God has put all things in subjection under his feet." But when it says all things, whoa, wait a minute. I went too far. Let's back up. He must reign until he has put all his enemies under his feet. Now, what's the next verse say? And the last enemy that will be abolished. Now, it doesn't say defeated here, right? It does not say defeated. This means done away with. This means that death is not going to even be anymore. He says the last enemy that will be abolished is death. But how does that happen? How does that happen? And how will that affect me as a single individual? In John chapter 3, Nicodemus came to Jesus. He was a ruler of the Jews. He was a teacher of God's people. He came to Jesus and he was wanting to know things. He came by night because he was scared. Scared somebody had seen him. And he wanted to know about things. And the Lord said, the first thing the Lord said to him, unless one is born again, you can't see the kingdom. You can't be a part of it. You can't go there. Unless you are born again. And Nicodemus had no idea what he was talking about. Because Nicodemus only understood the dying that happens when your body falls to the ground. Folks, I got to tell you, I have never been so shocked in my life at how rapidly we are not the same person when we die. I wanted to get my baby girl, Sydney, out of that hospital. I have never seen anything like that. I have never seen a person turn from what and who you knew to something that was totally unrecognizable. I didn't want to see that. I didn't want her to see that. I wanted to remember her the way I knew her. But man, when that separation took place, when the spirit left that body, it was so immediate. It scared me to death. I don't scare all that easily. But that put the fear in me to make sure I understand that I am going to be rescued from this death. That when my body dies, I have been born again, a new life that God will take to be with Him forever. Never to suffer that separation again, because death is not going to be defeated, it's going to be abolished. It is our enemy. It is what is going to keep us from being with our loved ones and with God. Either their separation or ours will keep us from seeing them again. Have you ever talked to anybody that has any doubt that they're going to see their loved ones again? It seems to be a universal feeling. I'll see him again. He's in a better place. Maybe. Maybe not. And it's up to us to understand how death works and how it can be defeated. There's so much more I'd like to say to you about this, but we'll have to do it another time. I hope you will ponder your own condition before God. Ponder your condition about death, about how prepared you are to meet your Maker. And if you need to make your life right this morning, please come while we stand and sing the song that we have an offer.